Elegy Written in the Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. Thomas Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard belongs to the genre of elegy, which is a form of a poem written to mourn a person's death. Gray wrote this elegy in the year 1742. However, he published it only in the year 1751. He wrote this poem after the death of his friend Richard West. This poem is an elegy of a common man. It is Gray's masterpiece. The poem is philosophical and emotional at the same time. The beauty of the poem lies in its simplicity. Nonetheless, the poet belongs to this era which brings out the ultimate truth about life and death in free-flowing poetic lines. Gray's elegy deals with short and simple annals of the poor. The common people came very much into a picture from the time that Bishop Percy published his collection of old ballads called Relics in 1765, and with the French Revolution, which was a democratic movement of the people, by the people, and for the people. In his elegy, Gray celebrates the virtues of the common folk of his village, Stockforges, and is glad that they escaped the vice of great, wealthy, and ambitious people whom they would have quelled or surpassed if they had had the same opportunities. Their fate of obscurity was both a drawback and a blessing. Ultimately, when death comes, distinctions of greatness or wealth and of being unequal or poor disappear. Death is the democrat who makes all equal. Like the earlier poets, Gray is fond of abstract personifications, that is, personifications that do not come life through concrete features. His personifications can be compared with Milton's poem Allegro, where we have some pictures of laughter holding both his sides. On the other hand, his warm emotions and his interest in nature, along with his democratic sympathies, place him worth like William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and other romantic poets. The elegy contains common reflections couched in felicitous or strikingly exact language. This is the sacred form of poem, universal and timeless appeal. As Dr. Johnson said, the churchyard abounds with images which finds a mirror in every mind, and with sentiments to which every bosom returns an echo. Okay, welcome to my YouTube channel, Bachelor and Mastering This. As you have been watching and listening me, as you must have guessed that today we are discussing about Thomas Gray's masterpiece, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. I am sure you will accompany me till the end of this video. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe my channel, and if you are watching this and if you find it worth watching for your friends, please share, and don't forget to subscribe my channel if you are just a regular viewer without subscription. Okay, here is introduction. Let's get going with the introduction of Thomas Gray's elegy. Title is Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. The poet is Thomas Gray. It was published in 1751. The period that this poem was composed was pre-romantic period, or this was the age of enlightenment, a period of intense intellectual activity throughout the world. The genre that the poetry belongs here, this is a poem, and this is elegy. The style we have here is written in heroic quatrains. A quatrain is a 4-line stanza, but heroic quatrains rhyme in AB, alternate pattern, and we are writing written in iambic pentameter. Theme of the poem is death, the dominant theme. Death, the overreaching, is the inevitable fate of humanity regardless of wealth, power, and status. The short and simple annals of the poor are presented. It's about the way we remember the dead. Okay, here is introduction here. Thomas Gray may, however, have begun writing the poem in 1742, as I mentioned earlier, shortly after the death of his close friend Richard West. An elegy is a poem in which laments the dead. Here, the poet or somebody laments about the death of somebody favored one. Gray's Elegies, written in the Country Churchyard, is noteworthy in that it mourns the death of not of a great or famous person, but of common men. The speaker of this poem sees a sees a country churchyard at sunset, which impels him to meditate on the nature of human mortality. The poem invokes the classical idea, remember that you must die. The speaker considers the fact that in death there is no difference between great and common people. He goes on to wonder if among the lowly people buried in the churchyard some natural poets or politicians whose talent had simply never been discovered or nurtured. This thought leads him to praise the dead of the honest, simple lives that they lived. Okay, here we have the summary, very short summary of the poem in the single slide. Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is a poem by English poet Thomas Gray. It was published in 1751. The poem deals with the buried inhabitants of country churchyard and a meditation on the inevitability of the death for all. At dusk, the speaker observes the rural landscape and watches the ploughman and his cattle heading home. Upon seeing gravesides in the shade of a yew tree, the speaker considers the death of poor and rich people alike. The speaker phrases the modesty of the graves in the churchyard and realizes that death consigns all people, poor and rich, obscure and renowned, to a fate of oblivion. Okay, now let's get going with the discussion of the poem in Nepali. The title, ग्रामीण चिहानमा रचिएको शोक काव्य. यो टमस ग्रेको एउटा उत्कृष्ट कृति हो अनि यस कृतिमा उनले ठुलठुला मान्छेहरूको बिलौना गर्नुभन्दा सामान्य आम मानिसहरूको एउटा मृत्युको र तिनीहरूको चाहिँ एउटा क्षति, तिनीहरूको मृत्यु भएकोमा त्यहाँ त्यसले पारेको प्रभाव, उनको मनमा पारेको प्रभावको बारेमा उनले चाहिँ चर्चा गरेका छन्. अब यो एउटा मृत्यु यस्तो प्रजातन्त्र अथवा लोकतन्त्रको चाहिँ एउटा पात्र हो अथवा माध्यम हो जसले सबैलाई समान बनाइदिन्छ, सबैलाई एकै ठाउँमा लगिदिन्छ, सबैको चाहिँ समान हैसियत कायम गरिदिन्छ. त्यसो भएर मृत्युले नै त्यो गरिरहेछ भने मृत्यु फेरि अन्तिम सत्य पनि हो. अब मृत्यु बाहेकलाई हामीले कसैले पनि छल्न सक्दैनौँ. मरेपछि सबै एकै ठाउँमा जाने भएपछि अहिले बाँच्नुमा चाहिँ एउटाले अर्कालाई भेदभाव गर्नुमा के अर्थ छ? त्यो भएर प्रजातन्त्रको एउटा चाहिँ स्वाद चाख्नु भनेको मृत्यु वरण गर्नु हो भन्ने चाहिँ कविको एउटा लक्ष्य छ. अब यहाँ चाहिँ उनले के भन्न खोजेका छन् भने साँझ ढल्यो भनेर गिर्जाघरका घण्टाले मृत्युको सङ्केत दिन्छन्. बाँ बाँ गर्दै गाईबस्तु क्रमशः चौरमा झुम्मिन्छन्. थकित हली बिस्तार आफ्नो घरतर्फ फर्किन लाग्छ र संसारलाई अन्धकार र मेरा निम्ति लड्छन्. चौकिलो स्थल दृश्य अब उइलाउँदै जान्छ. समस्त वायुमा एक गम्भीर शान्ति छाउँछ. मात्र बखत बखतमा भ्रमरोले भुमो आवाज दिन्छ र अर्ध जागा घन्टीका टिन टिनको आवाज भएर पनि परसम्म सन्नाटा फैलिँदैछ. अगाडिको आइबी लहराको टौवाबाट असन्तोषी लाटो कोसेरो चन्द्रमासँग गुनासो पोख्दैछ. मानौ साँझले ऊ बस्ने लहरामा दखल गरेर उसको लाटो कोसेरोको प्राचीन एकान्त शासनलाई खलबलाएको होस्. यी ग्रेगम्यान एल्म रुखमुनि र यु रुखका छहारीमा जहाँ घाँसे लहराहरू रासका रास कुहिने अवस्थामा छन्. यो बस्तीको सामान्य पुर्खाहरू प्रत्येक आफ्नो आफ्नो सानो कोषमा यहाँको चिहानमा विश्रामका लागि सुताइएका छन्. अब यी चिहानमा सुत्नेलाई बिहानी पखको सुगन्धित वायुको आह्वानले, पराले गुणबाट गौँथलीको चिरबिरीले, कुखुराको तीखो डाकले र घन्किने नादले केहीले पनि चिहानबाट बिउजाउन सक्ने छैन. तिनका लागि दन बोल्ने अगेना पनि छैन. न त तिनलाई व्यस्त गृहिणीले साँझको हेरचाह पुर्याउने छन्, न केटकेटीहरू ती फर्केर आउँदा सधैँको जस्तो चोथे बोलीले लाडे भएर नजिक हुनेछन्. न त ती केटाकेटीले गुगुती खेल्दै इखालु मुहाइने खालान्। प्राय बालिनाली ती पुर्खाको हँसियामा समर्पित भएका हुन्थे। तिनका हल्लोका डोबले चर्च गुठी जग्गाका बाँझा पनि खन्न निहुरिन्थे। अब महत्त्वाकांक्षाले तिनका उपयोगी श्रमलाई खिसी नगरौँ, तिनका एकसरो पुग्ने आनन्द र भाग्यलाई न धमिल्याउन्, न त भव्यताले तिनको वर्षौँका छोटो र सामान्य कामबारे ती उप तिरस्कृत मुस्कान दियोस्। तकमा पदकको तुजुक शक्तिको आडम्बर र सौन्दर्य वा ऐश्वर्य सबका सबले नै मृत्युको अनिवार्य घडीलाई पर्खिरहेका हुन्छन्। गौरवको मार्ग पनि चिहानतिरै उन्मुख भइरहन्छ। everyman, यिनका चिहानमा कुनै स्मृति चिन्ह छैन भन्दैमा यिनलाई तैँले कुनै दोष दिने ठाउँ छैन। लम्बतन्न परेको ठाउँ बेलायत र चर्च दुवैले बुझ्न सकिन्छ। सिँगारिएको चिहान बाकस मार्फत घन्किरहेको घन्टीले ती मृतको प्रशंसा गीत गाइरहेको छ। के सिँगारेको अस्थि कलश र सजीव प्रतिमा छातीमाथिकोले फेरि यसको महल अर्थात् शरीरमा उडेको सासलाई फिर्ता बोलाउन सक्ला? के सम्मानको आवाजले मौन धुलोलाई फेरि बिताउन सक्ला? अथवा के खुसामदले मृत्यु वा भुत्ते चिसा कानलाई ढाडस दिन सक्ला? सम्भव। यो व्यवस्था गरिएको थलोका स्वर्गिक अग्निमा कोही आत्माले प्रेरणा पाएको थियो। तिनका हातले बादशाहको राजदण्डलाई झुकाएका थिए होलान् र रेट्ने बाजाको चरम मिठो धुन बजाएका थिए होलान्। तर ज्ञानले तिनका आँखामा आफ्ना पाना राम्ररी पल्टाउन पाइसकेको थिएन। त्यस्तै समयको बर्बादीका कारण सम्पन्नताले आफूलाई कहिले पनि उगार्न पाइसकेको थिएन। कठोर कङ्गालीले तिनका भद्र अवशेषलाई जहिले पनि थिचेर राख्यो र तिनका आत्माको उदात्त भावलाई हिउँ परिदियो। विशुद्ध गम्भीर किरणका कतिपय रत्नहरू यहाँ होलान्। समुद्रका अथाह गहिरा गुफामा अनेकौँ फुल अदृश्य फुल्छन् र मरुभूमि वायुमा मिठास उसै खेर जान्छन्। कुनै ह्याम्पटन जस्ता निर्भीक छाती हुने यो बस्तीमा अत्याचारी विरुद्ध उभिए होलान्। कुनै मौन अप्रतिष्ठित मिल्टन पनि यहाँ रहेका होलान्। त्यस्तै मुलुकको रगत खाएर निर्दोष बन्ने क्रमवल पनि यहाँ थिए होलान्। ती मृतले प्रारब्धले श्रोता सांसदका गडगडाहट ताली पाउन सकेनन्, सुखका त्रास भोग्न पाएनन्, विनाशलाई तिरस्कार गर्न पाएनन्, मुस्कान छर्ने माटोमा फलिफाप बाँड्न पाएनन्, मुलुकका नजरमा उसको इतिहास पढ्ने अवसर भएन। त्यस्तै तिनका गुणले फैलिन पाएनन्, न त दुर्गुण नै खुम्चिन पाए। हत्याबाट राजगद्दी हत्याउन पाउने अवसर पनि उनले पाएनन्। औ न मानव जातिका लागि उनीहरूको कृपाका द्वार नै बन्द हुन सके। उनले सत्य लुकाउन गर्नु परेको दुःखकर सङ्घर्ष पनि देखाउन पाएनन्। निष्कपट लाजले मुहार रातो पार्नुपर्ने सङ्कोच पनि तिनले अधुरो राख्नु पर्यो। न त तिनले प्रेरणाकी देवीको रापमा धूप सल्काएर विलासिता र अहङ्कारका देवलमा रास्ने खडा गर्न सके। भिडयुक्त कोलाहलका निम्नकोटी सङ्घर्षबाट टाढा टाढा रहेर तिनका सहज इच्छाहरूले बाटो बिराउने मौका कहिले पाएनन्। तिनीहरू आफू चिसो अलगिएको जीवनका उपत्यकामा शब्दहीन जीवन सङ्गीतमा कायम रहे। कवि चिहान क्षेत्रमा छन् भन्ने देखिन्छ। तथापि ती अस्थिपञ्जर शरीरलाई अपमानबाट जोगाउन केही निर्बलीय स्मारक चिहान आसपासमा निर्माण भए। सुनिर्माणमा टाकन टुकन जोडेको कविता र छन्दन बन्धका प्रस्तर ढुङ्गाले श्रृङ्गारले सजाइयो, जहाँ यहाँबाट गुज्रनेका लागि शोक संवेदनाका निम्ति अनुरोध गर्दछन्। प्रस्तरमा लेखिएका तिनका नाम र सम्बत, तिनका कृति र शोकबारे कुनै अर्धशिक्षित अशुद्ध भाषामा लेखेको देखिन्छ। त्यहाँ अनेकौँ पवित्र ग्रन्थहरूले यताउति छरिबरी भएर गाउँलेलाई मर्नै पर्ने चोला हो है भनेर नैतिक पाठ पनि सिकाएका छन्। तर पनि मर्ने चोला भन्नेमा जो मरेर गए ती त मुख विस्मृतिका शिकार भए। ती मृतले आफ्नो वरिपरि रमाइलाका हर्षका दिन छडेर गए र विगतलाई उति वास्ता गरेनन्। तैपनि कुनै मायालु छातीमा तिनका लागि ठाउँ रहेको छ। ती बन्द भएका आँखाले मृत कसैको चोखो आँसुले बगोस् भन्ने चाहेको छ। चिहान समेतबाट प्रकृतिको आवाजले फलाकिरहेको छ र हाम्रा भस्म खरानीमा तिनको सहज राप चलेको छ। तिमी कवि र कविता असम्मानित मृतलाई दृष्टिगत गर्दै यी कविता पङ्क्ति मार्फत तिनका सहज कथाको वृत्तान्त लेख्छौ। संयोगवश तिम्रो मृतको कुनै आफन्त एकान्त मनले प्रेरित भएमा तिम्रो भाग्यबारे खोज तलास गर्नेछ। संयोगवश कुनै युवकले कपाल फुलेपछि भन्ला पनि हो हामीले उसलाई मृत प्राय झिसमिसेमा हतार शीत लफन्ड्याउँदै उकाली छोरमा घाम ताप्ने हिँडेको देख्ने गर्थ्यौँ। अगाडि झुमिरहेको बीच रुख जसका घुमाउरा उदेकपूर्ण जरा माथिसम्म फैलिन पुगेका छन् का फेदमा मध्याहमा ऊ मृत आफ्नो शरीर लमतन्न पार्थ्यो र छेउको पहाडी खोलालाई नियालिराख्थ्यो। अगाडि वनका नजिक घृणाले हाँसे जस्तो गरी बाटामा हिँड्दा मनका कुरा खेलाउँदै हिँडिरहेको हुन्थ्यो, हिँड्ने गर्थ्यो। कहिले कुप्रेर फुस्रो चिन्तित अनुहार लिएर, बेवारिसी जस्तो बनेर वा चिन्तामा पिल्सी जस्तो गरेर वा निराश प्रेममा भरङ्ग भएर। एक बिहानी मैले उसलाई ऊ आउने गरेको पहाडमा बाँझो चौरमा उसको मन परेको रुख छेउमा देख्न पाइनँ। अर्को बिहानी आयो, तर यसमा पनि मैले उसलाई आफ्नो खोला छेउमा देख्न पाइनँ, न त चौरमा न वनमा, कतै ऊ देखा पर्यो। तेस्रो दिन ऊ देखियो, तर उसका निमित्त मलामी थिए र शोकित थियो। उसलाई बिस्तार गिर्जाघरको बाटोमा बोकेर ल्याइँदै थियो। जानुहोस्, त्यसमा लेखेका कविता पढ्नुहोस्। हुन त पढ्न सकिने छैन, जुन ढुङ्गामा पुरानो काँडे पोथ्रा मुनि अगाडि देखिँदैछ। उसको अब चिहान स्मृति लेख। उसको मृतकको शिर अब पृथ्वीका काखमा अडेको छ, जुन युवकलाई प्रारब्ध तथा कीर्ति दुवैले चिनेनन्। जन्मको विज्ञानले उसको मामुली परिवारको जन्ममा निधार खुम्च्याएको थिएन, सन्तापले मात्र सदा उसलाई आफ्नो बनायो। ऊ उदात्त स्वभावको थियो र उसको आत्मा विश्वासिलो। ईश्वरले उसलाई ठुलो पुरस्कार दिए, किनभने उनले उसका विपत्तिमा एक थोपा आँसु थिए। उसले ईश्वरका पुरस्कार स्वरूप एउटा मित्र यति मात्र मृतकको चाहेको थियो, त्यो पायो। अब यसभन्दा बढी उसका गुणहरू नखोज, न दोषहरूका डरलाग्दो घरबाट उसका अवगुणहरू खोतल्ने काम गर। उसका गुण र अवगुण दुवै डरपूर्ण आशामा विश्राम लिइरहेका छन्। जन्मदाता र ईश्वरका छातीमा सबै बास गर्दैछन्। ओके, द्याट्स अल विथ द डिस्कसन अफ द पोएम इन नेपाली. Now let's get going with the discussion. Here is a critical appreciation of the poem. Thomas Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard is one of the most famous elegies written in any language. It is not on the death of any particular person, friend or relative. One evening, while Gray was standing at Stockpoge's churchyard watching the graves of the poor unknown peasants, an idea came to his mind. He wrote his elegy on the death of the neglected fellow citizens. A note of deep melancholy and broad humanity runs through Gray's elegy. It is a retrospective of humble rustics with universal notes and sentiments. After building an atmosphere of befitting evening landscape, the transitional poet Gray in his poem proceeds further to elaborate the rude ancestors who lie buried in the churchyard and beyond recall at present. In fact, the elegy runs thereafter with its true sense in perfectly elegiac mood with the reflection of these poor rustics. These are the rustics resting eternally, and no mourning hues, sounds, or any such echoing songs sung by the poet could have the power to make them awake. The children will no more greet while returning home after day labors. The elegiac note permeates the entire atmosphere with the reference of those rustics' simple youths, sorrows, and obviously referring to the irrevocable nature of death. Since the villagers are dead and buried in their graves, no worldly activities which used to happen during their lifetime will happen. With their death, this chapter of the family life is closed forever. The simple rustics had their homely occupations. They used to reap their crop smoothly with their sickles and plowed the hard land with their horses. They joyfully took their cattle to their fields. Mighty trees fell under the heavy strokes of their axes. They were familiar with these homely occupations of the village. In an ironic tone, the poet Gray proceeds by saying that even though proud and ambitious men mock at the toil of these labors, the inevitability of their death is eternal true. Further, what he declares becomes a glorious line. The boast of heraldry, the pomp of power, and all that beauty, all wealth ever grave, awaits like the inevitable hour, the paths of glory lead but to grave. Elaborating another moral note, Gray says that all the death memorials on tombstones are futile to express the dead one's exuberant back. All words of flattery, eloquence is useless to the deaf ears of those dead rustics. The rustics who are buried here were greatly skilled. The vast, rich, and accumulated knowledge of centuries remain locked to their eyes. Extreme poverty, with its chilling effect, extinguished their holy or religious enthusiasm as well as the warm and generous impulses of their hearts. Here might have been resting, dauntless, courageous, Hampden, poetic Milton, or a leading quality of like Oliver Cromwell. Owing to acute poverty and poor living conditions, they remain unheard and obscure. However, it is unlucky and sorrowful of their sad lot. It is a matter of consolation too. These men lived far more the scenes of feverish struggle and restless activity in crowded cities dominated by sin. They had simple, humble desires and they kept away from evil courses. At the peaceful hamlet, they lived with joy and pastoral elegance. Far from the madding crowd, ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool sequestered bell of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. The sentiments drawn in the poem are easily understood and widely familiar owing to its universal sentiments. The sentiments regarding the dead ones in the churchyard are so common and genuine. If the trophies and memorials are missing, Gray finds rightly that they are useless, recalling the dead ones into the living world. Further, Gray is quite justified while saying that gems, pearls unseen are lying unknown in the vast domain of earth. The simple rustics are thus hidden from us. Full many a gem of purest ray serene, the dark unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Usually a poet writes an elegy on the death of his dear friend. Traditionally it is imagined that the dead person was a shepherd and his fellow shepherd upon the poet sings sorrowfully in his praise. An elegy gradually passes from a sad state of mind to a state of hope as the poem ends, but this elegy is not written of the death of a single person. If he has universal appeal, it has universal appeal, and the feeling of loss has been exquisitely expressed in a manner which is indeed unprecedented in the history of English literature. Okay. Now let us get going with the discussion. The poem connects with many earlier British poems that contemplate death and seek to make it more familiar and tame. Gray's poem has less emphasis on common images found there. His description of the moon, birds, and trees dispels the horror found in them, and he largely avoids mentioning the word grave, instead using euphemisms. Thus, the poem was inspired by the poet's visit to a country churchyard. So, the title is Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. Gray's elegy deals with the short and simple annals of the poor. In fact, it gives a complete picture of life and history of the poor people living in the villages. The poem begins in a churchyard with a speaker who is describing his surroundings in vivid detail. The speaker emphasizes both oral and visual sensations as he examines the area in relation to himself. As the poem continues, the speaker begins to focus less on the countryside and more on his immediate surroundings. His descriptions move from sensations to his own thoughts as he begins to emphasize what is not present in the scene. He contrasts an obscure country life with a life that is remembered. This contemplation provokes the speaker's thoughts on the natural process of wastages and unfulfilled potential. The speaker focuses on the inequities that come from death obscuring individuals while he begins to resign himself to his own inevitable fate. As the poem ends, the speaker begins to deal with his death a direct manner as he discusses how humans desire to be remembered. As the speaker does so, the poem shifts and the speaker is replaced by a second who describes the death of the first. The poem concludes with a description of the poet's grave over which the speaker is meditating, together with a description of the end of the poet's life. An epitaph is included after the conclusion of the poem. The epitaph reveals that the poet, whose grave is the focus of the poem, was unknown and obscure. Circumstance kept the poet from becoming something greater, as he was separated from others because he was unable to join in the common affairs of their life. In the concluding part of the poem, he says that his epitaph would read thus: "Here lies the young man who was not popular. His life was full of sorrow. Knowledge was his only wealth. He gave his life to misery, and all he longed was for a friend to support. One need not look away to know about him. All that he did lies with him, close to God in the lap of earth." The poem, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, speaks of ordinary people. It is an elegy for poor villagers, rustics. They are not famous, but they are honest. So, the poet has written this poem in honoring them. The poem talks about the death as an equalizer. Rich or poor should end in death. Moreover, no man can escape death, its ultimate truth. In death, all are equal. Death treats everybody equally. Besides, nothing, including any amount of riches or glory, can bring the dead to life. Even poor people deserve respect for their death. Given opportunities, they would have given great men in their times. As far as the setting and mood is concerned, the time is evening, and every living being on earth is retiring for that night. As the poem opens, the speaker is seen at the churchyard. He hears the usual evening sounds. The church bell is ringing. The shepherds and their cattle are returning home after the day's work. The location is rural, rustic. The atmosphere is subdued and melancholy. Darkness and silence fill the feast, except for the hooting of the owl. To hoot to it, the buzz of the beetle, and the ringing of the bells. Regardless of all this gloom, the speaker stands in the middle of tombstones in the graveyard, and well, there he imagines the lives of the dead people who silently sleep there. The poem, Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard, consists of 33 stanzas. Each stanza has 4 lines. As an elegy, this poem mounts the death of ordinary men. In this poem, Gray talks about the death of the lives of the middle class people. The poem follows all the conventions of the elegiac tradition. Scholars look at this poem as a representative piece of literature for the genre of elegy. Most importantly, the poem follows the conventions of an elegy, and there is a pastoral setting. However, there are no pastoral characters. The poem ends in the poet's own epitaph. In addition to its great content, the poem has beautifully executed figures of speech in the stanza that talks about hidden gems and desert flowers. There is a difference in tone between the two versions of the elegy. The early one ends with an emphasis on the narrator joining with the obscure common man. The poem ends with the narrator turning towards his own fate, accepting his life and accomplishments. The poem's primary message is to promote the idea of Englishness and the pastoral English countryside. Okay, and it's time for us to go with conclusion. The poem's origin are unknown, but it was partly inspired by Gray's thoughts following the death of the poet Richard West in 1742. The poem is an elegy in name, but not in form. It employs a style similar to that of contemporary odes, but It embodies a meditation on death and remembrance after death. The poem argues that the remembrance can be good and bad, and the narrator finds comfort in pondering the lives of the obscure rustics buried in the churchyard. The two versions of the poem, stanza and elegy, approach death differently. The first contains a stoic response to death, but the final version contains an epitaph which serves to refresh the narrator's fear of dying. Okay. With this discussion, I have come to the end of my today's discussion regarding Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. I am sure you got the points. If you have any queries, you can put your ideas in my comment box. I shall be back with another important video for your intellectual horizon, expanding of intellectual horizon, and I am thankful to you. I am very much dedicated to you, and I am very much concerned about your dedication for time, spending your time and patience. Thank you very much.